Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Good Shabbos.
Sometimes a couple things can be true at the same time, even though they may be opposite of our understanding of our own worldview. And I shall explain. Last week, for those who are not here, or for those who did not hear the sermon online, I talked about my recent mission trip coming back from Israel representing Temple here. The trip was absolutely brutal, but on the other hand, the most important trip of my life. On that Friday night last week, a congregation was visiting us, high school confirmation from back east, here on a civil rights trip. And I think it's absolutely paramount that we still get our civil rights students, they get to see our history, learn about it, and at the same time, they get to see the progress that we have made. Upon completion of our service last week, a couple of those students came up to me and challenged me about my remarks on the Bima. They challenged me, they pressed me. They were upset with me as to why I did not talk about Israel's killing of 40,000 Palestinians in Gaza. And this is when I finally realized it doesn't matter the facts that we know. It doesn't matter the nuances. It doesn't matter that I could throw every single statistic at them and talk about where they're getting the information. It was utterly impossible to get through them. Utterly impossible. I almost say that when Holocaust survivors returned in 1945, I don't think the Jewish communities in this country were pressing the British forces and the American forces as their bombing campaigns in Dresden and throughout Europe and Japan. And to be honest, it crushed me. Teenagers from a Reformed congregation back east was so hyper-focused on not of our own people during the worst time in our lives since 1945. I went home, called my mentors, spoke to my family, trying to process the difficulty of trying to reach to a generation that truly sees this war as something else. And it's so weird how Judaism can speak to you. Because here we are in Parshat, the second Parsha in the book of Exodus, and we start beginning to learn about the plagues. And our rabbis, centuries ago, truly know how to get to our neshama, to our soul. They teach us that the plagues were not only for the Egyptians. And ideally, God wanted to have one plague for the Egyptians to fear the God of Israel in order for them to be free, and at the same time, that plague was intended for the Israelites to see the God of Israel is real, and God will redeem you. But due to hubris, arrogance, the inability to believe, so many Israelites closed their eyes and still did not believe in the power of the reality that they were witnessing then. So this is what's at stake for the Jewish people today. We have the plagues in the world, and we have some in our own communities that represent the Israelites who didn't see the plagues then. And I can't let this be the direction in which we shall go moving forward. And therefore, despite my absolute dismay. I am more strengthened than ever to get this congregation where it needs to be with regard to empathy and embracing a new form of Israel action work. For those who did not hear last week's sermon, I'm calling on this congregation, if you so choose, to please email Charlie Collette or Adam Gordon, our Board of Governors, and ask them to adopt language in our mission statement that supports the state of Israel and the Jewish people worldwide. Please email them. Second, I was moving fast. We've already made connections with the Reformed congregation in Rosh Ayin, Bavat Ha'ayin, a congregation that we once had a relationship with. Larry Brooks showed me the incredible photo with Rabbi Miller and Rabbi Scott of the Torah. And we will be re-solidifying this relationship and more information to come. I've already spoken to Elizabeth Block, and we are moving fast with regard to Heller High in Tel Aviv and Alexander Must High School, that we are seeking teenagers that are willing to spend forgo a semester in their high school here in order to be in Israel. A game-changing opportunity, an opportunity that will solidify one's Zionism. And we learned that we have alumni at Temple who participated in this experience, from Andy Rotenstreich to Stephanie Friedman. 4, I've been emailing people asking them to join an Israel Action Committee. It cannot be alone. I need your help. And finally, a tentative time frame, a possible mission trip to Israel in early November of 2026. That gives us some time, 2026. And young families out there, that gives you plenty enough time to find babysitters, because we need you on this trip especially. Because here's what's going on right now. For 6 weeks, we are in the second week of the 6-week ceasefire phase in Israel. The Israelis are experiencing probably the worst forms of psychological terror that I don't think any of us could possibly comprehend. In order to have this empathy of rock, we saw the release of Emily Damari, Daron Steinbecker, Romy Gonen. We saw them being delivered by the grotesque signs of Hamas, celebrating a victory against the Jewish state, dressing them up in Palestinian garb and giving them a gift bag of photos while they were in captivity. Celebrated, chanting of their victory, and handing them over to the passive, I'm being kind, International Red Cross as they brought them back to Israel. And immediately as we saw the images of these 3 women being with their mothers, a celebration of life that's something we will never, ever forget in our minds. And especially seeing the courage of Emily Damari, whose 2 fingers were shot off, has become a symbol of resistance in Israel. And like so many Israelis do, the image of her hand in the baggage has become tattooed on many bodies to show that even in dark times, the Israelis will rise again to the challenge. And then, God willing, tomorrow, we'll see the images of Karina Erev, Danielle Gaboa, Larry Albag, and Alma Levy, soldiers, come back and be greeted by their families. We will see the same scenes in Gaza, where Hamas will celebrate a victory. But upon their return back to the land of Israel, you can see some of that uncertainty among the Israeli population have a little bit more healing. As Americans, I don't think we've ever experienced anything like this before. You know, I can remember 1979, 1980, when our Americans were held hostage in the American embassy in Iran. But that's nearly 4 decades ago. And I'm highly confident that most Americans can't recall the names of those Americans who were held hostage in Iran. And the proportionality between America's population and Israel's population, again, it's apples and oranges. That the first time, actually in collective Jewish history, this is what Israel is facing. So when we think about life, and we think about perspective, and we think about the ebbs and flows of our everyday reality, I want us to take the time to be thankful in the country in which we live in, and at the same time be empathic, aware that the next 5 weeks of the Israeli corpus, the Israeli ethos, is going to be in spiritual and mental disarray. And so, as I conclude my remarks and the mission that we face as Birmingham Jews, later on in this week, my frustration, my anger towards these high school students, it started to ease. Because I recognize one in high school is different when one becomes 28 and then 38. In Rosh Hashanah, it's the season of change, and I hope to God one day in life they'll remember this moment. But here is the cruel paradox in which they must experience. It's only a matter of time before our Holocaust survivors will pass away due to old age and other ailments. And in order for our teens to learn about the Holocaust, they'll resort to video, movies, museums about the Shoah. And in a way, we were okay with this. But now, never in our imagination that we would have a new generation of survivors. A new generation of survivors that will tell their story for decades and decades and decades to come. And once their testimony is recorded and museums are erected, I am not willing to lose faith on a generation right now that is still living in the plagues of Egypt. So we have another obligation. We're going to be like the American Jews in 1945 who endeavored to ensure that these stories were solidified. And we're going to do the same thing for those Jews, those Israelis, those Arab Israelis, those who experienced the worst form of evil a year and a half ago. if we are going to be a formidable Jewish community for years to come, we got to understand what's at stake. And Judaism is committed to remembering what happened and ensuring that those memories are reminded for future generations to come. It is going to be a brutal 5 weeks for Israel. But I ask this congregation in some capacity to lift them up and to try to bring them to their despair out of it. Shabbat Shalom.